Quality, comfort, and grip at an affordable price. Whether it's our standard, pro, or elite socks, there's an option for everyone. Try a pair for yourself now at puregripsocks.com.
For me, the Messi version of the F50 Elite is one of the best Messi boots Adidas have ever put out, and also one of my personal favorites of the year. Having said that, if you liked everything about the Messi F50 from a feature standpoint, but maybe they didn't fit you properly, or availability is an issue, or maybe you're just not a Messi fan, what would the closest alternative be? Maybe this is a little bit surprising because they're technically not speed boots, but the Nike Tiempo Legend 10 Elite is definitely the closest that you can get to the Messi F50, which is interesting because I wasn't the biggest fan of the Legend 10s, but I really like these Messi F50s, so has my opinion changed or am I just getting caught up in the hype? Let's talk about that. Where really quickly before we get started, if you enjoy the comparison videos on the channel, don't forget to drop a like on this one and make sure you're subscribed if you haven't already so you don't miss out on my reviews of all the latest football boots of 2024. Starting with the price, where the top of the line Messi F50 Elite sits in between the $300 F50 Plus and the $260 regular F50 Elite, bearing a retail price of $270, which is about the going rate for a top-end speed boot these days from Nike and Adidas, where the Tiempo Legend 10 Elite is actually one of the least expensive top-end models on offer from Nike and Adidas, bearing a retail price of $240, which I know a lot of people that have been longtime fans of the Tiempo series aren't happy with, given the fact that this is now a full synthetic football boot rather than being made of kangaroo leather. But head-to-head compared to the Messi F50, given the similarities, these are $30 less. Where, by the way, you can pick up both of these boots below their normal retail prices by way of some exclusive SR4U coupon codes by checking out the links down below. When it comes to touch on the ball, what both of these boots have in common, despite being in completely different categories, is that they have full synthetic uppers that are trying to feel like natural leather. And they're also both boots that are trying to simulate a feel on the ball that they once had on offer. Obviously, in the case of the Tiempo, it was always made from some type of a kangaroo leather upper, where of course there were certain variants that were full synthetic, but you could always get kangaroo leather if that's something that you wanted, where in the case of the F50, if we look back at the early days of the Adi Zero, the most popular variants of the F50s were the ones with actual leather uppers. Where back in the day, Messi wore leather F50s and everybody wore leather Tiempos. The fact that that's no longer an option anymore is a little bit sad, but what we have now from both of these boots is still pretty good. Where the Messi F50 features their Hybrid Touch 2.0 synthetic, which is technically what you're also going to find on their current line of top-end Predators. However, on the F50, because it's a little bit more simple in terms of its overall construction, it ends up feeling softer and more pliable. It's definitely still on the thinner side, but it has that little bit of plushness to it that when it comes to touch on the ball, it gives you more of a dampened sensation than what you'll get from the more raw synthetic of the normal F50 Elite variants, which I'm personally a big fan of, and it gives this version of the F50 a little bit more of that sense of control if, again, you really appreciate having that little bit of dampness to the touch. In other words, you still get a little bit of that cushion touch on the ball without the boots feeling bulky, where overall, this is still what I would consider to be a relatively thin upper. Where the Tiempos feature Nike's brand new Fly Touch Plus material, which Nike promises is actually softer than the kangaroo leather they were using before. I think that's a bit of a stretch. From a thickness standpoint, it is maybe a smidge more padded than what you're going to find from the F50s, but from a touch and feel on the ball perspective, I would actually say it's pretty tough to tell a difference between the two when it comes to overall thickness, meaning that you're still getting that dampened touch on the ball that admittedly is very convincing in terms of not actually being real leather, but at the same time, it's still going to hold its shape and structure like a synthetic material would over natural leather, which is going to be definitely softer than this, but it's also going to stretch and just generally not feel quite as structured on your foot. So again, it's one of those trade-offs that you do make that with the Tiempo in particular, I know a lot of longtime fans of the series, including myself, weren't particularly happy about. But again, head to head with the Hybrid Touch 2.0 synthetic of the Messi F50, these two boots feel very similar on the ball. Even down to the grip on the ball, these two uppers are quite similar to each other, where with the F50s, you're going to find that sprint web texturing in the form of these long lines running through the forefoot on either side that have some grittiness to the touch that might not seem like it's going to do a lot when you're holding the boots in hand, but when it comes to actually making contact with the ball, it's raised enough to where the friction is actually meaningful in terms of not necessarily giving you that sticky sensation against your foot, but the friction that it creates definitely does give you that little bit of extra grip that I'm personally a really big fan of, where in the case of the Tiempos, you can see these little dots scattered on the medial side of the foot. Again, they look very minimal, they're extremely rough to the touch. That, I would say, is fairly noticeable in terms of giving you that little bit of a grittiness feel, with the big difference with the Tiempo compared to the F50 being that the surface of the upper, whether it's because of the ACC tech or not, because we've had plenty of boots with ACC that didn't have this sensation, the boot as a whole has a little bit more of that kind of sticky sensation to the surface. It's not quite to the level of the Nike grip material that you're now going to find on both the Phantom as well as the Mercurial series, at least when you're talking about the top end models, but in terms of consistent grip across the entire foot, especially in wet playing conditions, the Tiempo does offer that little bit of extra grip that you won't necessarily get quite as much of with the F50. Across the top of the foot, you'll find another design similarity between these two boots in that they both feature a central lacing system with a knitted component closing off the middle of the upper, where on the Tiempo, you get a very traditional central lacing system with a single hole lace setup, with the central portion of the upper being filled in with an elasticated flyknit, as we're used to seeing from Nike, where it does create this one-piece enclosure in that the flyknit itself is connected to the inside of the upper, meaning that you can't open it up, which for somebody that doesn't like the tongue to move around is great. However, when it comes to putting the boots on, it does make the opening a little bit smaller and just generally putting them on slightly more tricky. But if you've worn one-piece upper football boots over the last 10 years or so, then you kind of know what to expect here. The design is relatively straightforward, where in the case of the Messi F50, again, central lacing system with a single lace hole setup, and you even have an elasticated prime knit material, basically Adidas's equivalent of flyknit, covering up that middle portion of the upper. However, it's not connected to the sides on both sides. It's actually a burrito style tongue, which is something that is more or less a pro modification that Messi has had on his boots for quite some time, that is now making it to the general public. This means that the opening when putting the boots on is significantly larger, and then this tongue kind of just wraps across the top of the foot, which I think allows for better overall comfort as well as adjustability. But at the end of the day, it is also very much a preference thing. When it comes to the base of these two boots, again, I think the expectation is that given that the F50 is a speed boot and the Tiempos trend more towards the traditional side of things, that obviously the F50s are going to be significantly more aggressive. But as you can see, side by side, 4 blades under the heel, blades at the tip of the toe, and more or less what are conical studs running through the main body of the forefoot. Where granted, the feel and design of the Tiempo sole plate is definitely more geared towards just being flexible rather than kind of giving you that responsive springback feel, where definitely the F50 sole plate with its sprint frame 360 design is that little bit more rigid through the forefoot as you'd expect from a top-end speed boot. But as far as responsive sole plates go, this is kind of near the bottom end of the list, especially when compared to something like a Mercurial or even Adidas's own F50 Plus model. As far as traction is concerned though, these both being FG layouts, I really think it's pretty difficult to say, or at least misleading to say, that one drastically outperforms the other. The studs are nearly identical in shape, they're nearly identical in position. Yes, technically you have bigger blades more forward on the F50 than you do on the Tiempos, but then you have these really small blades close to the very tip of the toe, which you could argue might be a little bit more effective than these blades right here. Again, when it comes to actually playing in the boots, I think it's very difficult to tell a major difference between these two, where again, despite their marketing, from a traction standpoint, they're both going to provide aggressive traction, but also still have that freedom to twist and pivot because of the rounded shape that the majority of the studs in the forefoot have. And then there's the weight, where again, I think most people would just automatically assume that the speed boot F50 is going to be significantly lighter than the non-speed boot Tiempo, but both in the same size 9.5 US. We'll start off with the Tiempos, and you can see that they weigh in at 7.1 ounces, the equivalent of 202 grams, which is actually very lightweight, on par with a lot of top-end speed boots. And then we'll throw on the Messi F50s, and you can see that they weigh in at 7.15 ounces, the equivalent of 203 grams. Meaning that technically the Tiempo is 1 gram lighter than the F50. In other words, they are exactly the same weight, once again pointing to the fact that these two boots are way more similar than I think a lot of people give them credit for. It also points to the fact that despite not being marketed as a speed boot, the Tiempo Legend 10 Elite is speed boot light. It's not until you get these two boots on feet where you can really feel a distinct difference between them, and that is mostly down to overall shaping, which also has a huge impact on overall fit and comfort, where of course, like I always say, your mileage may vary when it comes to how I talk about fit, because obviously I can only comment on how they fit my feet specifically, and everybody's feet are shaped a little bit differently. So if you are interested in either of these two football boots, if possible, I would strongly recommend trying on the alternative, because whichever one does ultimately fit you the best is the one that's probably going to lend you the best overall experience. Having said that, they're pretty much the opposite of, again, what I think most people would expect, where the F50 being a speed boot, you'd expect to be slimmer, narrower, and just generally tighter fitting overall, where the Tiempo being more of like a heritage kind of classic style of football boot despite being full synthetic, you'd probably expect a little bit more width, a little bit more volume, and generally a more relaxed fit. But it is in fact the opposite. The F50 is wider with more volume, and because of that more open burrito style tongue across the top of the foot, it just allows for, I would say, a more relaxed sensation in terms of how it wraps your foot, while still wrapping very closely with the laces tied tight, where the Tiempo definitely trends towards more of a speed boot type fit and feel, in that it's tighter, narrower, and lower volume pretty much through the entire foot, particularly through the heel and midfoot. Right off the bat, before even tying the laces, it's going to be a tighter fit. And then certainly through the forefoot and toe box area, it's very tapered, it's relatively slim, and it's very low volume. So if you need some extra space at the front of the foot, you're not going to love the feel of the Tiempo compared to the F50. To make a long story short, and especially if you don't have the opportunity to try both of them on, if you tend to prefer a wider, higher volume fit, whether because that's a preference or the shape of your feet, I would definitely say go for the F50, whereas if you tend to prefer more of that speed boot, tighter, lower volume type of wrap around your foot, you're probably going to prefer the fit and feel of the Tiempo. When it comes to sizing, I'm wearing both of these boots in my usual size 9.5 US, and obviously the general shaping and volume does affect how the sizing ends up feeling. However, in the same size, I am still left with the same amount of space at the end of my toes. So generally, whether you're going for the F50s or the Tiempos, I would strongly recommend going true to size in order to achieve the best possible fit. So in conclusion, is the Nike Tiempo Legend 10 Elite as good as the football boot that I personally think is one of, if not the best new releases of 2024? The simple answer to that question is yes. Objectively, from a component standpoint, these two boots are pretty much as close as it gets. Having said that, I'm not sure that my overall opinion on the Tiempo has changed. Maybe I give it a little bit more credit now than I once did when they first dropped, But having the choice between these two football boots, I'm still picking the Messi F50 Elite on the basis that I think it fits better, it's more comfortable. I much prefer the design of the tongue having that little bit of relief given the fact that it's not a true one-piece upper. I think the sole plate feels that little bit better. I like the fact that it has an external heel counter, and I also personally prefer the type of grip that you get from the texturing rather than more of the sticky feel you get across the upper of the Tiempo. Of course, these are all mostly personal preferences, where I think really the big deciding factor between these two for everybody should be which one fits you better, where if you really are interested in the Messi F50, I would strongly urge you to at the very least try on the Tiempo Legend 10 Elite, because as you can see, if the Tiempo does happen to fit you better, it's every bit as good, it's almost exactly the same football boot, and technically they're $40 less expensive, $30. The Legend 10 might not be a very good Tiempo, but it is a pretty good F50.